What would happen if the person who got kicked out of a first-class seat turned out to be the one holding the fate of the entire airline? Have you ever been asked to leave your seat simply because you didn't look like someone who belonged there? Flight FL 720 from Los Angeles to Boston took off on a quiet afternoon. As the lights came on in the first-class cabin, a firm reminder echoed through the refined space. "Sir, this area is reserved for premium passengers. I'll need you to move to economy." Elijah Monroe looked up from his phone, his gaze calm and unfazed. He wore a charcoal hoodie, faded jeans, and carried a worn leather backpack. No one could have guessed that this man, dressed like he was headed to a corner bookstore, would soon become the center of a storm that would shake the entire airline industry. Flight attendant Amanda Stillwell frowned as she noticed Elijah still seated in 1A. She repeated her request, louder this time, drawing glances from surrounding passengers. A man in seat 2C leaned forward, as if ready to step in and help resolve the situation, while a younger passenger in 3A quietly went live on TikTok, whispering into his mic, "This is wild. They're trying to kick a black man out of first class, and I'm catching it live." Elijah calmly handed over his boarding pass, clearly marked 1A FL 720, first class, and said simply, "I booked this seat 3 weeks ago." Amanda took it, glanced at it, then frowned as if inspecting a counterfeit. "I'll need to check the list again," she replied, her tone laced with suspicion. No one said it out loud, but the energy in the cabin shifted. It wasn't about the seat anymore. It was about Elijah's skin and the quiet composure he held in a moment that was rapidly escalating. But there was one thing Amanda didn't know, and no one else on that plane could have imagined. Within the next 45 minutes, the name Elijah Monroe would force Atlantic Air's board of directors to call an emergency meeting. And it all started from seat 1A. Elijah remained seated, his eyes never leaving the tablet as flight attendant Amanda continued tapping, her brows furrowed as if trying to prove something. She looked up, leaning slightly toward him, her voice sharp though cloaked in a veneer of politeness. "According to the system, you booked an economy seat. I'm afraid you're in the wrong section." Elijah didn't react immediately. Calmly, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, opened the airline app, and presented his digital ticket, clearly showing seat 1A, first class, booked 3 weeks ago. The screen also displayed the diamond emblem, the highest membership tier at Atlantic Air, with over 350,000 miles accumulated. But Amanda barely glanced at it, her expression unreadable, then gave a slight smirk. "Anyone can fake a membership card like that. I'm sorry, but I have to ask you to return to your assigned section." Words like those, spoken in a private room, might have been brushed off as a misunderstanding. But here, in the first-class cabin, with every pair of eyes fixed on them, each word landed like a public accusation. An older man in the row beside them spoke up, softly but with clear intent. "Son, you should go back to wherever your real seat is. No need to make a scene." Elijah simply nodded without responding. But he did not move. Instead, he pulled a hard membership card from his wallet, the real thing, embedded with a chip and laser-engraved personal ID, and placed it gently on the fold-out tray. "I've flown with this airline for 6 years. Seat 1A is mine today," he said, his voice steady but firm. Amanda glanced at the card, then turned away, clearly unmoved, muttering just loud enough for Elijah to hear. "Some people don't realize high places aren't meant for them." At that exact moment, the feed from the TikTok account @JetJustice began spreading rapidly. capturing the ongoing live stream of a black passenger being treated like a criminal for sitting in the seat he had rightfully purchased. And in the heavy silence that followed, there was one thing Amanda still hadn't realized. Every word she spoke, every expression she showed, was being witnessed by thousands. Not just inside the cabin, but across the entire internet. Elijah didn't need to raise his voice to push back. With quiet precision in every action, he was letting the truth speak for itself. Not long after, the cabin stirred as Captain Lionel Braddock emerged from the cockpit. He was tall, with 3 gold stripes on his shoulder, a sun-weathered face that spoke of experience, and eyes sharp as blades as they scanned the passengers before landing on Elijah. "Sir," he said, his tone firm and rigid, "we need your cooperation to vacate this seat so the flight can depart on time." Elijah looked up, calmly handed over his boarding pass, identification, and diamond membership card. "I am seated in the correct place, Captain," he replied, his voice low and composed. Braddock didn't bother to look at the documents. Instead, he furrowed his brow and muttered, "I've flown thousands of flights. I know when someone is trying to game the system for an upgrade. Amanda, call security." His words were like fuel thrown onto the simmering tension already in the air. A young passenger leaned toward a friend and whispered, "He didn't even read the ticket," while inching his phone camera closer. Elijah remained poised. He took out his phone, turned on the camera, and began recording in a steady voice. "It is currently 2:47 p.m. I am being asked to leave a first-class seat I paid for in full, with all valid documentation, on Atlantic Air Flight FL720. Braddock snapped, "Turn off the phone. You are disturbing the peace." Elijah responded evenly, "I'm recording evidence of discriminatory behavior." Amanda had already contacted ground services. Moments later, 2 security personnel arrived from the jet bridge, Marco and a woman named Lisa, approaching with professional calm. "What's going on?" Marco asked. Braddock didn't wait for explanations. He pointed. "Passenger refuses to leave a seat that isn't his." Marco took the boarding pass from Elijah, examined it carefully, cross-checked the ID and phone. Lisa glanced over and nodded. "This ticket checks out. Seat 1A, first class, confirmed from 3 weeks ago." Amanda remained defiant. "Could still be fake. People know how to manipulate the system." Marco looked up, his expression now sharp. "With all due respect, this card was issued by the airline's own system." In that moment, something shifted. The stares from the other passengers began to change. A murmur moved through the cabin. A woman in seat 3B stood up and spoke clearly. "I saw him show all his documents from the start. Why has no one checked properly until now?" But the surprise wasn't over. Just then, Elijah's phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen. "Meeting room A1 is ready. The board is waiting for you." The woman in 3B, who had already been watching curiously, froze for a second as her eyes caught the message. She tilted her head, looking at Elijah with an entirely new expression, because only those with real authority have others waiting on their word. Elijah nodded when the 2 security officers asked him to leave the aircraft to verify information at the counter. He didn't resist, didn't challenge. He simply stood up in silence, slung his worn leather backpack over his shoulder, picked up his membership card and boarding pass, and walked out of the first-class cabin under the watchful eyes of dozens of passengers. But behind him, the atmosphere began to shift. The woman in seat 3B, Dr. Rachel Voss, a leading internal medicine resident in Boston, whispered to her travel companion, "He didn't do anything wrong. They're just trying to push him off the plane." As Elijah stepped into the jet bridge, Teresa Hargrove, the operations manager, was already waiting for him, urgently dispatched from the command room. "What's going on here?" she asked the security team. Marco handed her Elijah's ticket. Teresa scanned it, and her face slowly paled when she noticed the special internal emblem embedded in the design, an insignia that only appears on tickets booked through the high-level shareholder system. At that same moment, at gate F7, a corporate communications staff member rushed in, out of breath, holding out a phone for Teresa to see. The screen displayed a directive from the central dispatch system. Flight FL720, delayed per request from the Communications Control Division. Activate incident code level 3. Meanwhile, on social media, the live stream from @JetJustice had surpassed 7,000 views, with the hashtag #MonroeFlight quickly trending on the platform newsreel. Comments poured in from users everywhere. Another black man kicked out of first class. He had the documents. Why didn't anyone check? Who is this guy that the whole system jolts when he leaves his seat? Inside the cabin, the first passengers began to stand up in protest, not because of the delay, but because of the sense of injustice unfolding in plain sight. Dr. Voss pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of the message that had appeared on Elijah's screen earlier. Then she searched the name Elijah Monroe online. Within seconds, her eyes widened at the headline that appeared, "Chairman of Orion Holdings, the force behind dozens of billion-dollar acquisitions." She looked up and quietly said a single sentence, like a warning to the entire cabin. "I think we just kicked out the wrong person." And that was the moment the media earthquake truly began. Not inside the cockpit, but right there in the airport hallway, where a system long accustomed to controlling everything suddenly found itself unable to control the truth unraveling by the minute. At the waiting area near gate F7, Elijah sat down on the metal bench with a calmness that made it seem as though nothing had just happened. His worn leather backpack rested beside him as he gently opened a small leather case containing his business cards, a thick, silver-edged card with his name embossed in elegant lettering, Elijah Monroe, Executive Chairman, Orion Holdings. Teresa Hargrove remained standing nearby, her face tight with tension as she held the card in her hand. Her eyes scanned the words, and her expression turned on. She knew that name. Anyone in the aviation industry did. Orion Holdings was not just an investment firm. It was Atlantic Air's second largest shareholder, holding 25% of its stock and nearly $2 billion in equity. Teresa swallowed hard, her hands slightly trembling as she tried to regain composure, but she couldn't hide the chill running down her spine. She turned to the security team, her voice rasping, "He's not an ordinary passenger. This is Elijah Monroe." At the same time, a clipped segment of the live stream from @JetJustice was reposted by a financial news outlet, accompanied by a headline that read, "Man removed from first-class seat on Atlantic Air is second largest shareholder, Elijah Monroe of Orion Holdings." Within 10 minutes, reports began to appear on Bloomberg, MarketWatch, and even Reuters. A man seated near Elijah, dressed in a dark suit with AirPods in his ears, saw the headline flash across his smartwatch. He turned, eyes wide with shock, then quickly opened his laptop. "Oh my God," he muttered. "We just witnessed a slap in the face to the airline's entire executive board." Back inside the cabin, passengers began murmuring louder, several demanding explanations from the crew. Meanwhile, on Atlantic Air's internal system, the emergency alert lit up. "Level 2 emergency. Activate special shareholder conference. Activate." And just 2 minutes later, Teresa's phone rang. A direct call from the office of Atlantic Air's CEO, displaying the name Celeste Graham, CEO. Elijah looked up at her, offering a quiet nod as if he had anticipated every move, his gaze steady and unsurprised. Everything was only just beginning, and the game had officially changed. In his hands was not just a first-class ticket, but the power to steer an entire corporation. And the most unsettling part was not that he had sat in the wrong seat. It was that the people who tried to remove him had made a mistake with the one person they should never have underestimated. Teresa's phone continued to ring. This time, it could not be ignored. She glanced at Elijah, her eyes almost pleading before she answered the call and switched it to speaker as requested by the voice on the other end. A woman's voice came through, low and urgent. "Teresa, this is Celeste. I need confirmation. Is Elijah Monroe currently at gate F7? Teresa replied, her voice slightly trembling. "Yes, Ms. Graham. He's here." A strange silence filled the line. Then the CEO's voice cut in, sharp as a blade. "My God, why was I not informed earlier?" "Put him on the phone." Elijah took the phone, holding it close to his ear. "Celeste," he said, his voice unsettlingly calm. "I was just asked to leave the flight I booked in first class by your team because I didn't look like the kind of person they imagined belonged there." Silence. Then he continued, "It's all been recorded, shared online. The hashtag is trending, currently number 2 nationwide. Your stock is about to drop faster than today's flight." Celeste's voice came back, low and almost hissing. "Elijah, tell me what you need." Elijah sat upright, his eyes fixed on the boarding gate where many passengers were still watching. "I need 3 things. First, immediate action against the involved crew, including the flight attendant and the captain. Second, a complete overhaul of customer service protocols with a 72-hour deadline. Third, a public apology from you directly, no deflections." Teresa stood frozen, and the nearby security officers were holding their breath. The voice on the other end replied, "Understood. You have full authority. Immediate action starts now." Elijah nodded and ended the call. He didn't need to raise his voice. In a world run by power, real influence is measured by who stops to listen when you speak. And right now, an entire airline was waiting on every word of the man they had just forced out of his own seat. Immediately after the call with CEO Celeste Graham, Elijah requested an urgent virtual meeting with the executive board of Atlantic Air. No assistants, no legal intermediaries, direct and public. In the airport's emergency operations room, a large screen flickered to life as rows of red indicator lights blinked rapidly. Within just 15 minutes, every member of the board appeared on screen. Some were still in partially buttoned shirts, others connected from golf courses or private vehicles, but no one dared to be absent. Elijah stood at the center, holding a thick set of documents printed on firm paper, his backpack resting beside his foot. No introductions were needed. Everyone knew exactly who he was. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elijah began, his voice even and cold, "Orion Holdings currently owns 25% of Atlantic Air. What happened today is not just an isolated act of discrimination. It is a systemic failure. And here are the conditions to prevent a full-blown shareholder and legal crisis." He opened the file, each section meticulously outlined. First, immediate termination of 2 involved staff members: flight attendant Amanda Stillwell and Captain Lionel Braddock within 24 hours. Second, full deployment of revised customer service training materials to all frontline employees within 48 hours. Third, development and launch of an anonymous third-party reporting system for discriminatory behavior within 72 hours. Fourth, the establishment of a $500,000 fund dedicated to diversity and equity initiatives within the aviation industry. And fifth, an official public apology from Atlantic Air, acknowledging the failure and committing to real reform. One board member objected, his tone strained. "The timeline is too short. We need input from legal and HR." Elijah didn't blink. He responded crisply, "You can reroute entire fleets within 6 hours during a snowstorm. This is not about capacity. It's about priority." Celeste Graham, from her end of the call, said nothing at first. Then she looked around, nodded slowly, and stated, "We accept all terms." But Elijah was not finished. He looked up, eyes locked on the screen, and added, "I need one more thing, a personal commitment from each of you in this room, starting with tying executive bonuses directly to measurable outcomes on equity." And at that moment, the air in the entire virtual meeting seemed to vanish. Because Elijah Monroe, once the passenger forced out of his seat, was now rewriting the rules of the game in the very heart of the boardroom. 3 hours after the emergency meeting, the internal notification system of Atlantic Air pulsed with a series of short alerts, signaling that change had officially begun. A memo was sent to all employees. Flight attendant Amanda Stillwell and Captain Lionel Braddock had been immediately terminated for severe violations of passenger conduct protocols. At the same time, a new training manual titled "Respect and Equity in Every Circumstance" was uploaded to the company's internal learning platform, with a mandatory completion requirement for all frontline staff within 30 days. A new icon appeared on the airline's mobile app: Anonymous Reporting, Protecting Passenger Dignity. And within just 36 hours, the third-party reporting system received its first official complaint. At Gate F7, where everything had started, passengers began to gather. Not out of curiosity, but because they were witnessing something unprecedented, a company being compelled to change not through protests or lawsuits, but through the quiet presence of someone with real influence. When Flight FL720 finally prepared for departure later that afternoon, an entirely new cabin crew stood at the aircraft door, visibly tense but resolute. Among them, Lead Attendant Liam Reyes bowed as Elijah Monroe stepped on board. "We sincerely apologize for your previous experience, Mr. Monroe. We will make sure this never happens again." Elijah said nothing, simply nodded and placed a hand on Liam's shoulder in silent acknowledgement. He returned to seat 1A, once the center of humiliation, now a symbol of transformation. From seat 3B, Doctor, Rachel Voss leaned in and asked softly, "How did you stay so calm all afternoon?" Elijah smiled faintly, opened his laptop, and answered with a sentence that wasn't loud, but carried far. "Because anger is instinct, but changing the system, that's strategy." The plane rolled away from the gate, taking off 53 minutes late, but carrying far more than just passengers and luggage. It carried a powerful message that the era when power was defined only by where you sat is over, and the era where justice can take flight has just begun. Within just 1 week of Flight FL720, the impact of the incident involving Elijah Monroe had spread far beyond the airline industry. The training program Respect and Equity in Every Circumstance, developed by the Orion Holdings team, was requested for licensing by 6 other airlines, including international names like SkyVantage and EuropaJet. Greyhound, America's oldest bus company, announced a plan to implement a similar anonymous reporting system called SafeRide. 3 major hotel chains, Hearthstay, Union Suites, and Meridian Lodging, declared partnerships with human rights organizations to build behavior monitoring systems for employees based on the Monroe Protocol, a name now used by financial media as a new standard for corporate culture reform. And then, amid a wave of positive headlines, a smaller story emerged that deeply moved the public. Angela Thompson, a young black woman who had recently completed her MBA, sent Elijah a handwritten letter recounting how she had once been asked to leave first class on United Flight 237 because her ticket didn't look valid, despite being fully paid. She wrote, "That day, I simply stayed silent and moved to economy. But when I saw you stand up for yourself and for people like me, I realized I no longer had to endure in silence." Angela is now working with the ACLU to file a legal complaint, becoming the lead plaintiff in a class action lawsuit addressing discrimination in the airline industry. And the documentation from the FL 720 case will serve as critical legal evidence. What had once been labeled as disruptive behavior had become the spark for a movement, one in which victims could turn personal injustice into collective pressure for accountability. At the same time, an internal report from the US Department of Transportation recorded a 71% decrease in discrimination complaints in passenger transport within just 6 months. In the boardrooms of transportation companies, the name Monroe was no longer that of a passenger. It had become a protocol, a principle, and a landmark in the awakening of an entire industry. 2 years after the incident aboard flight FL 720 at the National Conference on Transportation Equity held in Memphis, Elijah Monroe stepped onto the stage before more than 800 delegates, from corporate executives and civil rights attorneys to social activists and government representatives. Behind him, a large screen displayed a graph showing a steady decline in discrimination complaints within the airline industry, beginning precisely after that pivotal moment at Gate F7. Elijah didn't read from a script. He simply looked out over the audience and said, "Change doesn't come from anger. It comes from systematic action, clear evidence, and people who refuse to accept injustice as normal." The entire room was so silent you could hear the click of the next slide. An image of Angela Thompson standing beside a United Airlines representative after reaching a settlement agreement and a company-wide retraining commitment. But what moved the room most was when a hand rose from the front row. Sarah Stillwell, the former flight attendant who had once removed Elijah from seat 1A, now serving as a diversity training advisor for an international hotel chain. Her voice trembled. "I'm the person who asked Mr. Monroe to leave the plane that day. But I'm also the person who spent 2 years learning, unlearning, and helping my organization never repeat what I once did." The room rose to its feet in applause as Elijah stepped down, shaking Sarah's hand. Not out of sentimental forgiveness, but with the strong nod of 2 people now standing together on the side of the solution. At the end of the conference, Elijah looked directly into the live stream camera, watched by over 150,000 people, and closed with a single line that echoed far and wide. "If you witness injustice on your journey, don't look away. Record it, report it, act on it. And if you stay the course, something that begins with the wrong seat can lead to a system set right." As he left the stage, no one remembered the ticket, the first-class seat, or the phone call with a CEO years ago. They remembered only that there was once a man told to move down, who lifted an entire industry up. In a world driven by systems, lasting change does not come from fleeting outrage. but from steady, strategic actions led by respect. Elijah Monroe did not respond with noise. He rebuilt an entire process. If today's story made you believe that justice can begin with a single seat and ripple across an entire industry, then like this video, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other inspiring journeys, and leave a comment with the phrase, "Choose fairness," because every voice raised at the right moment can become the catalyst for a better system.